Welcome, and thank you all for joining Women's Way for the Closing the Gender Wealth Gap Forum, Investing in Women-Owned Businesses. I'm Diane Corman-Levy, the Executive Director of Women's Way, and I'm delighted that all of you decided to spend the next hour with us. I do want to acknowledge that we are at a very troubling point in the history of our country right now with what's happening at the Capitol, the hatred that we're seeing, the violence that we're seeing. And for me, the more reason why it's so important to do these convenings and to get together to actually organize and learn, and how do we continue to fight for equity and justice? How do we continue to end racism and sexism in our country? So we are really delighted that you decided to join us tonight and to join the movement to strengthen women entrepreneurs and to improve gender economic equity for all women. So we are here in solidarity for equity and justice and peace. And I hope you will learn so much from this incredible forum of amazing panelists and moderator. So today's forum is a part of a year-long series whose purpose is to educate different stakeholders about the drivers of the gender wealth gap and actionable steps each of us can take to help close the gender wealth gap. Today's session focuses on investing in women-owned businesses and why supporting women entrepreneurs is important to the economic security of women and their families. You will hear from 4 amazing panelists, speakers, who will address the issue from policy, investment, capacity building, and entrepreneurial perspectives. You will also have the opportunities to ask questions to the speakers via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to address as many of your questions as possible. The chat is disabled, but we will pop in links and resources that you can view. We will also record the session and make it available for you to review again, and for those who cannot attend today's session. Before I introduce these amazing panelists and moderator, I do want to show some slides. Sorry about this. Does everyone look good? Mm-hmm. Yes. So again, this is a second session forum on closing the gender wealth gap, investing in women-owned businesses. I do want to first thank our 2 sponsors for this session, Permit Capital Advisors and Glenmede. And without their support, it would be, well, with their support, it really makes it more possible to actually do these important education sessions. So I want to talk a little bit about Women's Way and the gender wealth gap. Really, what is it? What are some of the drivers of the gender wealth gap, to give you some more context? For those who don't know who Women's Way is, we are the leading nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of women and girls and gender equity. We actually were the first umbrella funding federation in the United States specifically dedicated to women's issues. So we've been around for now 43 years fighting the fight for gender equity. Before COVID, the data was not good on the economic status of women. Nationally, women and children were 73% of the poor, and Philadelphia had the highest poverty rate at just above 25% among the 10 largest cities, and the largest demographic group living in poverty were women aged 25 to 34. And we know that when women are poor, children are poor. So over 37% of children in Philadelphia were poor, and these statistics have actually worsened since COVID. So since COVID, what has the impact been on the state of women? Well, nationally, women's unemployment rate rose by 12.8%. So 2.9 percentage points larger than men's increase of 9.9%. And some of the reasons why women have been disproportionately impacted is that women account for 74% of employment in high contact occupations. So a lot of women lost their jobs. And also there's a lack of the childcare infrastructure and family forward workplace policies. So many women are dropping out of the workplace because they don't have access to affordable childcare. And in that one data point, in September, 1 million Americans dropped out of the workforce, 80% were women. So Philadelphia's unemployment rate increased from 5.9% to 15.4%, again, majority of whom are women. We also know now that 60% of business closures due to COVID-19 are now permanent. And many of these businesses are owned by women. So we say that investing in women is good for women and children. It's also very important to the economy at the regional, national level. This came out recently that if conditions for families do not improve, and if levels of maternal labor force participation and work hours experienced during this pandemic persists long term, they're projecting lost wages would amount to $64.5 billion per year. So investing in women is good for our economy. It's good for the local, regional, and national economy. So why build assets? Why build wealth? And we're very passionate about wealth. It's important for women to be in the workforce and improve their wages, which is part of wealth, but it's really about building assets. Because assets enable women to remain stable through financial emergencies, such as this one, such as like COVID-19. It enables women to live with housing security, improve children's opportunities, take risks that result in better jobs or business startups, pursue higher education for themselves, maintain good health, retire securely, pass on security to the next generation, and participate and shape political and social agendas. So we come from an asset building framework because we realize if we really want economic parity for all women, we have to really build assets and build wealth for all women. So when we invest in women, we are advancing our region and our nation. Women comprise more than half of all workers, but that has changed since COVID-19 because of so many women are dropping out of the workforce. We know that nearly half of mothers are the primary breadwinner for families, and the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are women of color. We also know that parental assets are the strongest predictors of children attending and graduating from college. They say the greatest determinant for a child graduating from college is the socioeconomic status of mothers. We also know that closing the gender wealth gap would result in over GDP gain of $4.3 trillion or over $13,000 per person by 2025. So as we say, women are the backbone of our economy. So the gender wealth gap has not only improved, it's gotten worse. So at median, single white women own 32 cents on the dollar compared to single white men. Black and Latino women own less than a penny, and this has not improved for the past 50 years. And there is a lack of data on the wealth gap of Asian, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders. Because they're very diverse and heterogeneous racial groups, there's no disaggregated data that exists to demonstrate the women's wealth gap that is not aggregate. So there's a huge need to invest more in disaggregating data to better understand women's wealth gap in these households. So what are some of the causes? Well, women earn less than men, and this has to do with still women get paid less than men. It also has to do with occupational segregation, where women tend to go to occupations that are valued less and paid less. They are more likely to be denied mortgages, loans, or to be overcharged for them. They are more vulnerable to predatory lending. And the more women are graduating from college than men, and actually the fastest growing population of graduates from college are women of color, yet they hold 2/3 of all student debt. And again, women tend to provide the majority of unpaid caregiving. So these are some of the causes of the gender wealth gap. Now, of course, we're talking about women-owned businesses today. And in women entrepreneurs, they are the fastest growing group in the country. Yet, they receive less than 3% of all venture capital in the USA. Black and brown women entrepreneurs receive less than 1%. And we'll talk more about that. Women entrepreneurs get denied loans more than men due to entrenched gender, racial, and ethnic biases, even though women have a better track record of paying back loans. And they take on more personal financial risk due to historical and systemic barriers to building assets. So at Women's Way, we decided that really if we want to create gender equity, we must advance the economic security of women. So we launched something called the Women's Economic Security Initiative in October 2017. The purpose is really to build a long-term system level collaborative initiative centered around the shared vision that all women in the Philadelphia region attain financial well-being for themselves and their families. So this is a long-term vision with a long-term strategy and long-term investment. It fosters systems level learning and change, and it helps to break down silos across organizations and sectors, because we know we cannot deal with this complex issue as in isolated ways that we've been doing. Organizations from across sectors must come together and work together. So since we started WESI, as we call it, we have 82 active members representing 54 organizations spanning for-profit, nonprofit, philanthropic, and public sectors. And really important is we have women with lived experience of economic insecurity from the very beginning, sitting at the table, co-creating, co-designing strategies to improve the economic security of women. We're going to be transitioning WESI to the Gender Wealth Institute, and we are planning to do that in the spring of this year. And the mission of the Gender Wealth Institute is to close the gender wealth gap in the greater Philadelphia region by advancing research and practical solutions that build wealth for women who are economically insecure. And kind of 4 key practices of the Gender Wealth Institute, as I mentioned before, women and girls with lived experiences are co-creators in the research and development of practices. Oftentimes, those impacted by the issues at hand are just passive recipients of programs and services that are designed by people that don't have those experiences. We have flipped that around, that women and girls are influencers and actors and are co-creating these strategies along with other partners. The Gender Wealth Institute also brings structure and resource to this practice of co-creating, co-learning. We will produce quality data and disaggregate data and new narratives around how we talk about the root and systemic causes of economic insecurity of women, and work to inform influencers, researchers, and other practitioners on new practices and tools for advancing economic security. So now I'd like to introduce the 4 panelists, which I'm really excited to introduce. Essma Bengabsia is a senior associate in sustainable and impact investing at Glenmede Trust, where she is responsible for researching and identifying investment opportunities in global public markets. Ms. Bengabsia is also a World Economic Forum Global Shaper in Philadelphia and a board member of the American Muslim Community Foundation. Kersy Azocar is Senior Vice President of Microlending at FINANTA, a community trust, First Fund. Sorry, I had that wrong. As a Senior Vice President of Microlending, Ms. Azocar manages FINANTA's microlending department for business and consumer loan programs. The microlending department includes FINANTA's most recognized affinity group lending program, which provides access to capital and financial education in group setting. FINANTA is one of the top 5 small businesses microlenders in the nation and the #1 in the region. Tanya Morris is a business certification expert and has been helping professional women and organizations increase productivity and achieve goals through coaching and mentoring for the bulk of her professional career. It was his passion to help professional women entrepreneurs and organizational leaders that led Ms. Morris to start Mom Your Business in 2017. With over 20 years experience in nonprofit management as an outreach specialist and advocate, Ms. Morris brings a wealth of knowledge in business growth and development, relationship marketing, and public participation. Dr. Kimberly McGlonn is founder and CEO of the Philadelphia-based manufacturing startup, Grant Boulevard, where she oversees the daily management, creative direction, and growth strategy for the brand. With 18 years of experience as a designer of curriculum, Dr. McGlonn is a committed advocate for social justice and environmentalism, advocacy that informs her approach to business leadership in the fashion industry. Ultimately, the company's mission is to construct stylish, sustainably sourced fashion, while not only reducing landfill waste, but in supporting women who are formerly incarcerated or who have experienced homelessness and leading self-sufficient lives. And then we had the moderator. I'm very excited to have Geri Aglipay as the moderator of today's discussion. She is the director of the Midwest and Greater Chicago region at the nonprofit organization Small Business Majority, where she leads policy, education, workforce, and ecosystem infrastructure efforts in Midwest states. Ms. Aglipay is also the national manager of women's entrepreneurship programs nationwide. She focuses on the link between small business, the community, and government to foster financially inclusive policies, trainings, and programs, supporting small business owners and the self-employed, especially women and entrepreneurs of color. So I'm going to hand this over to Geri to actually facilitate and lead a very engaging and informative discussion. So thank you, Geri.
Great, thank you. I want to first start with you, Tanya, with Mom Your Business. Congratulations, first of all, for taking the initiative to start a business that also helps other women entrepreneurs. Tanya, as a woman who mentors and coaches women of color entrepreneurs, how do women-owned businesses help close the gender wealth gap in the United States? And jumping off on what Diane had alluded to in the slides, particularly, how does this help address the unemployment rate that for women in the United States as well?
Thank you, Geri, and thank you, Diane, for inviting me to this conversation. I think for me, simply put, it is for women to really become and to continue to lead the way in being job creators. 19% of the majorities, let me get my numbers right here. Yeah, the number of people working for women owned companies has increased by more than 19% in the last 5 to 10 years. So that tells me that we are not only are we starting companies, but we are starting companies that are leading the way and employing people. And so I think if we are going to really make a change there, we have to begin to continue to focus on becoming job creators. This is one of the things that I really am very passionate about in the work that we're doing with Mom Your Business in particular. And why we're starting an accelerator program is because we really want to move small businesses in particular from bootstrapping and being side hustles to really becoming businesses that employ people. If you look, I was looking at a list last night on Twitter of some of the more popular companies that we know of and use every day were started by women. Eventbrite, Canva. I could go down the list, Spanx, and some of those, and these are multi-million-dollar companies, right, that are employing people. And so I think the main thing that we have to do is we have to really, really focus on becoming job creators, and in doing that, providing a living wage. We can't continue with a minimum wage that is not a livable wage, especially when you look at the expenses of single parents and women who are providing a head of household. I have twin sons. I was a single mom, and so I understand how important it is to really be able to have a living wage in order to provide for your family. So for me, it's really moving small businesses from being solo entrepreneurs and sole proprietorships to becoming job creators.
That's fantastic. And again, congratulations on creating that accelerator program to take women-owned businesses from a micro business to a larger small business that employs a critical mass of women, thereby creating revenues and affording a living wage, a fair wage for women in the workforce, as well as the women-owned business. I'm going on that. For the accelerator, you saw a need.
Yes.
To create more jobs.
Yes.
Through women-owned businesses. Why is it important, and how can we increase more investments in programs such as these accelerator programs that you created in order to provide the support services to scale women businesses up? Women-owned businesses?
That's a great question, Geri. And I think what I saw in the work that I was doing with Mom Your Business and as a member of Black Girl Ventures was I saw a cycle, and I'm sure some of our entrepreneurs on the panel can speak to this, and some of those other service providers can speak to this. I saw women that were constantly in that cycle of bootstrapping, right? Just constantly bootstrapping, putting your own money. I started Mom Your Business in 2017, and to this day, I've not taken a salary, right? And so you find yourself in that bootstrapping cycle of constantly investing your own money in your business in order for it to grow. And so I saw the frustration of that experience and not being able to go to that next level. And so I think what has to happen is that we need really more. And Diane cited the statistic that less than 1% of venture capital funds go to Black female owned businesses. And so what we have to begin to do, more Black women first have to become VCs and investors and angel investors that are investing in programs like mine and programs like FINANTA and some of the other organizations that are service providers, to give that oomph, that next push to go to the next level. You have the Arlen Hamilton and Lolita Taub and Monica Greenwood, some of these women that are VCs, Fearless Fund, who have created these funds now to begin to invest in programs like ours as accelerators that are going to really create that next wave of entrepreneurs that would inevitably become job creators.
Thanks for that, Tanya. And thank you for that recommendation that we also need more investment by other women,
Yes.
as well as women-owned investment firms, equity,
Yes.
venture capitalists who are women themselves, to boost the resources and the services that organizations like yours provides. I think one of the benefits that your organization provides is that mentorship capacity, in addition to the training, which is incredibly invaluable for women. And it's a unique space that, again, reflecting what Diane was saying, women are juggling many roles as business owners. They're mothers,
Right.
they're caretakers, they're the business owner who is doing 10 other things, key roles in that business. So that mentorship component and investment by venture capital into women-owned businesses brings another dimension, is what I'm hearing from you. It isn't just capital.
Correct.
There's a social capital piece that it encourages.
Absolutely.
For women as well.
Absolutely. It's so important. There's a study that shows that Black women in particular need community in order to contribute to their success, right? And so that's why we're part of organizations like Black Girl Ventures. That's why organizations like Mom Your Business are so important. Organizations like Girl Trek, because Black women thrive when they are a part of a community. And so I like to say that mentoring is not something that I do, it's who I am. I started as a mentor when I was in nonprofit, when I was working with women that were transitioning from welfare to work and spending that time helping them do everything from purchase their first home, to build their credit, to start their business, and beginning to really take that time. And that was really when I began to really develop that mentoring relationship. And so it is absolutely critical. And I think that's one thing, that I'm really proud of what we've done is being able to enhance that mentoring relationship and show how important it is to take somebody from where they are to where it is that they want to be.
Thank you. Speaking of capital, I want to move to you, Kersy, in regards to women and capital to help fund their business and to scale up their business. In contrast to men, what are women's unique challenges that you will not see with others who are seeking capital? What are their challenges in accessing capital and financial management support, much like Tanya's group provides, in order to start and grow up their business? And I don't just mean, equity-based capital, as we have talked about venture capital, but also debt-based capital, which is actually the majority of capital that is deployed for our participants on this, is actually the majority of capital that's deployed to small businesses. So would love to hear your perspective on that, Kersy.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see so many participants and being part of this. I think it's not a secret that money plays a huge role in the growth of our female entrepreneurs. And what we've seen is that for the most part, our communities of colors are definitely debt adverse, but women are too. So I think as women, we start thinking, oh, I don't think I have the money to pay this. I don't think, I don't want to get into debt. I want to continue reinvesting all this money. And where I'm going with that is that we are in a time that knowledge is power. So you need to make that informed decision and make sure that you need money. You need more money to grow. You need more money to have a better, a bigger business. And then it's important to to know that the funds that you are requesting are going to have a positive impact in your business. So I think in our case, we have a huge volume. We're the #1 SBA microlender in the region, and 48% of our loans are made to women. And for us, that's very, very important. It always fluctuates between 48 to 52%, but we're always in the high rank, because it is a reality that when we help our small businesses owned by women, that it has a bigger impact. So what I would say is that, and I think later on, I'll also talk a little bit more about how to get ready to overcome these challenges, and also how to get ready to make sure that your applications are approved, that you have all your tools. But again, the statistics don't lie. When women go to banks, they are declined. Well, two things happen: that we don't go as often as our male counterparts, but also when we do go, then we get declined. We have a higher chance of getting declined. And I always say that if you are Latina and you're a woman, business Latina, you're declined at the door. Like, you don't even have to go in, you're already declined. So I think it's important to, again, knowledge is power. So if you know that, how can you overcome it? How can you get all your documents ready, all your documentation? And also knowing that if you get a no, okay, why was I declined? Why? You have that right to ask. So I really hope that throughout the session, we'll get to add additional information, and I'm also sharing resources, because that's very important.
Thanks, Kersy. You know, in applying and getting prepared and having that relationship with the bank, I wanted to highlight what a CDFI is for those who are participating on this call, a community development financial institution, in terms of accessing capital. And a CDFI is a nonprofit entity supported and backed by the federal government, Department of Treasury, and investments by the private sector and other donors. But Kersy, you're at a CDFI, which serve 48% women, with the products that you have. Can you tell the audience, what are the advantages of going to a CDFI to obtain capital versus a larger bank? What are the benefits for that for women versus a non-CDFI?
Yes, for us, as you mentioned, yes, CDFI have a special designation, a federal designation, and it's important because, as the name says, we are community-based. So everything we do is intentional. And there's, wherever you are across the nation, there's a CDFI that's probably in your area. So I highly recommend everybody to research for their local CDFIs and find them. So the advantages, I'm gonna give you some context. So in our case, each microloan cost us between $2,000 and $3,000. So think about when we give $1,000 loan to someone, we are already losing money. So usually banks don't do that because they're losing money when they're giving these smaller loans. So what CDFIs do is that we fundraise money in order to offset that loss. So in addition to that, it allows us to offer or provide technical assistance. So we'll give you a loan, and we also help you and connect you with other resources. In our case, we have a credit department, so we help our clients addressing any credit issues. Other CDFIs may have other different departments. I know another CDFI in Minneapolis that they have a marketing department. They help their clients with websites, technology. So imagine nowadays that's a must, having all those services for free as part of your loan, or getting free business classes. So there's a lot of different advantages, and we become your ally. Is not the money is one portion of what you can get, but the other resources, as we know, PPP, the second round is coming, and there's going to be a huge portion of that money that's going to be allocated for CDFIs, because the government understands that we have that connection with the community, with our small businesses. So if you are, just as Tanya mentioned, you need to be part of different organizations or an association. So CDFIs are gonna be your allies. So I cannot stress enough the importance of knowing your CDFI in your area, making sure that you are taking advantage of all the services. And for the most part, they are free. And just making sure that you are not alone, that there's these partners that are able to provide loans and also resources.
Thank you. And for pointing out the PPP.
You just froze a little bit. Not sure if we can have it, but I want to mention again that this is a great time to have this presentation, because there's going to be more assistance, more PPP, more grants, whether it's a local or federal. So I really hope that the resources we're providing and the information we're providing are helping all of you to get ready and to make sure that you have all your documentations to obtain and take advantage of these funds. You just froze, Geri, a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Well, what I was saying was, thank you for lifting up that there is a set aside for CDFIs to particularly help small businesses and women in this pandemic for recovery. What have you seen in your colleagues at CDFIs, how COVID-19 has impacted women-owned small businesses? Particularly, like, what are the hallmarks that are standing out to you, given that you serve 48% of your products are going to women? Can you share with us that, and how are CDFIs for the recovery in the next year or two poised to help women-owned businesses?
Yes, thank you for the question. And I wish I had better news, but I think it's not a secret that our female entrepreneurs are struggling. And that's what we're seeing. When the pandemic first hit, we called all our clients or our lenders. We're working nonstop trying to connect them with resources. And we see that our clients that have children at home have more difficulties opening their businesses or getting their kids to school, and things are now more expensive. And in spite of all of that, we continue to see that our female entrepreneurs continue to make their loan payments, that they're very forthcoming when they need help or if they need a loan modification or a payment plan. But yes, we are seeing that they're struggling, sales are low. And also, on top of all that, our communities of colors are also typically not ready with the technology. So that's also another burden. So I highly recommend everybody to think about having technology as part of their business. This crisis, we don't know how long it will take, but things have changed, and a lot of the things are going to be digital. So it's important to have your printer, to make sure that you know how to do your PDF forms, because that's going to help you obtain all the grants and applications that are coming up. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And if anything, what Kersy has noted is that there's going to be additional costs and expenses that women small business owners are going to have as they pivot their business. And as you definitely pointed out, Kersy, is you're going to have digital costs that you may not have expected. So to adjust for that and working with a friendly institution for financing, such as a CDFI, they can help guide you with that. And working with a group like Tanya's, who provides that mentorship hand in hand, you really want to build a team, your bench. Who's there to help support your development for your business, and who's there going to be as you pivot your business to a new model, or even quite frankly, digitizing your business. All of that comes with new costs, new learnings, set asides on how to acclimate yourself and any staff you have to these new digital systems as well. And so these are considerations about why we want to invest even more in women-owned businesses when we consider what some of those unexpected costs may be for women. And that also includes cost of learning for the time that's needed for the women business owners as they learn these new skills. I want to move into more of, investments into women-owned businesses, and how do we incentivize more investments into women-owned business? So Essma, could you tell us, in your view, how can we incentivize more racial and gender equity in particular through investment-based products? And what's your experience been?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Geri. And thank you to Women's Way for hosting this extremely important discussion. I know this is an ongoing series for the full year, so I would encourage everyone to stay tuned for future topics as well. And also building on to what Diane previously mentioned, I want to recognize everything that's happening in the Capitol right now. And I mean, I applaud you all for dialing in today. Nonetheless, a pretty large audience here of over 80 people. So I really appreciate you all taking the time, and just sending our thoughts and prayers and our best wishes to congressional staffers and everyone in DC right now who is being nonviolent. Everyone else, I leave them to themselves. So no thoughts and prayers, unfortunately. But nonetheless, I think in terms of just the relevance of this conversation, I think to the current events that we're seeing around us, and the fact that Diane opened up this conversation by talking about how the gender wealth is actually, the wealth gap is significantly increasing given the effects of the pandemic on the lives of women, and particularly lower income women and women of color in the US. And if we don't take intentional action to try to turn that route, then those gaps are only going to continue to increase. And so this conversation is really not only about education, but also implementation and follow-up following this talk. And so when it comes to how do we incentivize an increase in investment with racial and gender equity, research is increasingly showing us that it's actually not only millennials who are interested in impact investing and sustainable investing. There are investors across every single generation, especially within the US, and an increasing number of investors who are interested in this space because of the fact that they see real financial value to this, in addition to the social value add and the moral value. So let me give you a few examples. When we talk about the increasing buying power with women and with people of color in the United States, Diane already mentioned several stats talking about how women and people of color are already combined the majority of the US population, and will continue to increase. So if you're an investor seeking to invest to generate competitive financial returns, you need to invest in companies that cater to the majority of the consumer segment in a country. It's just logical, it makes logical sense, right? And so what I'm finding increasingly is that it's not a matter of how do we encourage you or convince you to invest with a gender and racial equity lens. It's more of an education aspect. How can I show you how to do this so that you can start exploring it for yourself? Because all of the research shows that this is an investment approach that would improve one's risk mitigation in their portfolio and looking at financial returns. But now it's how do we put it to action? And so when we also think about closing the gender and racial wealth gap in the US, and we think about the economic benefits of that at a larger scale, when you hold back a majority of the population in a country, then you hold back the economic growth of that country, the potential of that country, the productivity of that country, and so on and so forth. So there's really benefit to using this investment approach, not only in a person's portfolio on their own, but also for the well-being of an economy overall. I think you're on mute.
Thank you for that. Apologies. What are some of these actionable steps to measure sustained generational impact? Because we're talking about building wealth, and Diane alluded to, this is also about building assets so that women are able to be economically mobile, but also can pass on that wealth. So what are some actionable steps to measure that, the investments that are intended to produce these outcomes are actually producing them? And, what are accountability approaches that we can take for these investments?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'll build onto a lot of what Kersy said. And I know we have a pretty diverse audience here, so I'll kind of speak to the different segments that we have on the line.
Thank you.
Of course, for institutional investors, such as pension funds, endowments, foundations, nonprofit organizations seeking to start up an endowment, there are a number of questions you can ask yourselves if you're getting started. The first few questions are just, what's the diversity of the managers of your portfolio, right? How many female managers are leading the investment strategies in your portfolio? How many women of color? And this is an extremely important question because there's a lot that builds up to this question. As we continue to engage with investment managers and the industry overall to increase the representation of women and people of color who are managing their strategies and leading these strategies, we're also inevitably forcing those firms to improve their cultures, because they're not going to be able to retain women if they have, high cases of sexual harassment in their culture. They're not going to be able to retain women of color if they have high cases of racism and discrimination. So there are lots of implications that go around you as an investor asking your manager, well, how many women are leading my funds? How many women are leading my portfolio? Because then in effect, that forces the manager to A, look at the often stark numbers of gender and racial diversity, but then also B, in order to even improve their numbers, that they can make a stronger sales pitch to you and maintain their balance sheet, that forces them to look at a whole other abundance of areas of improvement often that they may have in their culture, in their policies, in their pay equity, and so on and so forth. And that's extremely important, again, because studies show that the overwhelming majority of women in investment management have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace at some point in their careers. One study shows over 60% of women in the industry have experienced sexual harassment in some way, shape, or form, verbal, physical, both. And so this is a real issue. So when we talk about closing the gender wealth gap, let's start there. Let's start with just who's managing your money, and how we can reshape the industry, because we're not going to see equitable representation of women in investment management until we see equitable cultures and work environments that can actually retain those women. So that's a place to get started. Similarly, for investment firms and industry peers on the line, it's for us to look internally and say, well, how can we improve our own cultures? How can we make sure that we have stronger representation and more equitable policies and approaches? That's one thing. The other thing, and I really sat and kind of thought deeply through this as I was preparing for this talk, is thinking about the opportunity for engaging with companies. So I know we've been talking a lot in this conversation about investing in women-owned businesses, and that's crucial. But there are also a large number of corporations and companies that hold the majority of the wealth in this country. And so we don't only want to look at small businesses, we also want to look at the gatekeepers of wealth in the country and push them to improve their corporate behaviors in order to enable women to hold more jobs and more high-paying jobs in those companies. We're not going to be able to close the gender wealth gap in the US unless we are also looking at corporate America across sectors and engaging with those companies, and again saying, what's the representation of women across every single ring of the corporate ladder, across revenue generating teams and back office teams, what's your pay equity, and so on and so forth. And this is crucial because you need wealth to build wealth. And Kersy was just talking about that, right? So if women don't have access to these jobs, if women, and especially women of color, are stuck in low paying jobs where they need to work 3 or 4 jobs and have side hustles in order to be able to put bread on the table, then women are stuck at the bottom of the pyramid because they're struggling to even make ends meet, let alone build an investment portfolio, save for retirement, have health benefits, and so on and so forth. So if we can't make it to step 1, how are we going to make it to step 10? And that's crucial. And the reason shareholder engagement has so much power is because for anyone who's investing, you have the ability, as long as you meet the minimums, you have the ability to engage with the companies that you're invested in. Whether you're invested in ESG funds or not, whether you're invested in gender lens funds or not, you have a holding in Walmart, Amazon, any company, you name it, so long as it's publicly traded, you can engage with them. And so looking at the power you have as a shareholder and then exercising that power across your portfolio. And I'll throw out a few resources. There's an organization, for example, called As You Sow that our firm works closely with, and they literally do all the work A to Z in terms of, you know, filing resolutions, engaging with the companies. All you have to do as an investor is opt into their network. And then every time, and they pretty much cross compare your holdings with the companies that they're engaging with each year. And anytime there's an overlap, they'll contact you and say, hey, do you want to opt in? And they do a lot of work around diversity and inclusion. So that's just an open door and an opportunity for you to help improve corporate behaviors, regardless of where you're invested. And then the last thing I'll say is with high net worth individuals and with again, investors or investment firms, I think the crucial part that we need to keep in mind as we have this conversation is there are opportunities to advance equity across every point of the investment process and every behavior that we have within our portfolio construction process. And this is extremely important because when we think about improving investment firms' behaviors and improving corporate behavior across sectors, we also want to think about where the money is. So we talked a bit about venture capital, and I'm even guilty of this. I think often when we have conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are laser focused on venture capital because there's so much research on the lack of representation in terms of venture capital funding, but we forget the rest of the bucket. So only about 0.05% of startups in the US last year got venture capital funding. And the reason I bring that up because that's compared to almost 80% of startups last year who were funded through either personal savings or lines of credit. So the overwhelming majority of small businesses and startups are actually getting funding either through their own personal savings or through banks. Why is that important? Because when we talk about closing the gender wealth gap, we need to look at the lenders. Who are the lenders and what are their discriminatory practices? Kersy talked about this, and it's extremely, extremely important. If a Latinx woman or a Black woman walks into a bank, chances are, regardless of her credit score and regardless of her track record, she is not getting that loan because discriminatory practices are so prevalent in our financial system here in the US. And so as investors and as asset owners, we want to ask ourselves, how can we influence this industry to change its lending practices? Because unless women are given access to that capital, then they are not going to be able to fund their companies and they are not going to be able to sufficiently grow. They're going to stay stuck where they are, even if they have that talent, even if they have they might have a great customer pipeline coming in, a great balance sheet, but you need money to make money. And so $100,000 is not just going to pop up in the bank account. Even if they're doing great, they need to be able to access more wealth to build their wealth. And so let's constantly ask ourselves, how can we engage with these lending firms more? And how can we look at more financial inclusion tech platforms and companies in order to be able to create those opportunities for women to be able to climb up the socioeconomic ladder?
Thank you, Essma. And to recap some of the actionable recommendations that Essma has is looking for accountability in terms of the hiring practices and the workforce culture of hiring more diverse women in order to move the needle on accountability. There's also shareholder power and engagement that she discussed. And then there's also holding corporate America accountable too as to who they hire. Because many of the women, and I know this from many of you know this as well, who strike out as small businesses, worked for corporate America and were able to earn that wealth and build their assets that way. So it's also opening the door about more diversity in all these sectors, whether it's within for a cascading effect with the workforce hiring practices or the shareholders, or also holding the corporate America responsible, because we also see the intersection of hiring more women and diverse constituencies that help them build wealth in order to strike out on their own business. And speaking of the gender and racial wealth gap, I want to turn to Dr. Kimberly McGlonn, who as our last speaker on this panel. Kimberly, could you tell us what are the challenges that you saw women-owned businesses face that were exacerbated, before COVID, that were exacerbated with COVID, most especially women of color? And, what did you see as a resource to help meet their needs?
Yeah, so many things. Essma, I want to go back to so many things that you said are so, my thoughts on this question are so in line with what Essma was saying, just from a different lens. You know, she commented and she raised some really amazing points that we're going to need to let marinate about corporate culture and about corporate, you know, responsibility. And she talked about, you know, stockholder culture and responsibility. And the other piece of that trifecta is actually consumptive behavior. So like, while we should be critical of what corporations do, and as stock people who have the privilege of owning stock, we should be ever more mindful of who we're investing in and what they're investing in on our behalf. We also have an obligation as consumers to be mindful of whom we're spending money with. And when I think about what the struggles for women of color owned businesses, particularly Black owned businesses owned by Black women, it's that idea that so much of us, of our culture as consumers, it shifts our mind's eye away from the need of shopping local, of really being mindful about voting with our dollars for the success of businesses that are owned by women, based on our understanding that our national economy is rooted in the success of these small enterprises and how much they benefit local communities and local economies. So, you know, there's an important need for us to be critical of corporations. And there's a very important need for us to be critical of who we invest in. But part of that criticism has to be directed towards our own scrutiny of ourselves and our own behaviors as consumers. So when I think about those barriers to the success of Black owned businesses, of women owned businesses prior to COVID, it's the, you know, who's rooting for us? Who's changing their lifestyle, their practices, and their daily consumption to be mindful about finding companies across America in their own communities that are owned by women of color, and being really ever more intentional about returning, about sharing in our social media platforms, using our social capital to give persistent calls to action to people who we know, to say, you know, let's not go back to, we can think about July, right, where there was this huge bump. You know, I think about being a small business owner, and I've talked to other small business owners of color, particularly Black women, sizable bump in the attention we received from consumers in July. And that lasted for about 8 weeks. And then after that, you know, there was a series of this push to be thinking about, how do we show up for Black folk? How do we show up for Black women? How do we show up for Black businesses? And that wasn't sustained. And I think that if we're going to see the kinds of seismic shifts that this panel's, everyone's comments are pushing for, it's going to be all of us shifting our mindset to recognizing that this is a marathon, and that the success of these businesses is dependent upon our ability to stay in the marathon and to go the distance. And that means we're going to have to be really committed to thinking ever more mindfully about how hard it is for Black owned businesses prior to the pandemic to get access to retail spaces, to get leases that are fair, to get landlords that are respectful and flexible, that make us feel safe. And to making sure that our neighbors and all of us as neighbors are showing up for each other in this fight for us to be able to stay alive during and after the pandemic. You know, Diane opened up this entire session commenting on the fact that, you know, 60% of the businesses will permanently close post this pandemic. And the only way we can slow that bleed for Black owned businesses, women owned businesses specifically, is if we are ever intentional about who we shop with and how often we shop with them, and how often we use our time to make sure that we're promoting them, and making sure that people know that they exist. You know, that is our highest obligation as consumers.
Thank you for that. You know, so what I wanted to just recap what you were saying is, the consumptive behavior is important, but we have not sustained it. We're not very good as consumers, and considering women are the leading consumers in this country, about being conscious to sustain that, and being aware of the racial wealth gap, being cognizant that it's going to be harder for women of color and Black women in particular who are owners to seek that capital. And it's going to be additionally harder for them to seek space. In addition to that, and you know, we've noted this within Small Business Majority, there's also the resource capital in terms of mental resiliency that we need to be conscious of for Black owned businesses, which are more unique that you would see in pandemic times than we would see in non-pandemic times. It's more stark now than ever before, due to the systemic biases that have occurred and that essentially have held back communities, which many of these owners are coming from and wanting to go back to build their communities. It is not unusual to see those who come from corporate America that Essma, you know, alluded to, who are Black and brown leaders to go back in their local neighborhoods to start businesses and lift up the economic activity of that. You know, Kimberly, I wanted to say, you know, we know that in this country, within 10 years, you know, roughly 10 years, we're going to have majority minority workforce. And the previous panelists, Tanya, Essma, Kersy, had referred to workforce before and employment. We're going to have a majority minority workforce. How can economic activity driven by women of color owned businesses such as yours, you know, support the cultural transformation that you've been alluding to eliminate the gender, racial, and colorism biases that is existing?
It's going to take a lot of intentionality for sure. And it's going to take, and particularly post the pandemic, it's going to take a lot of recognition of how challenging emotionally and physically living through this moment has been for all of us. So it's going to be cultivating a culture within our companies with a different level of care and concern for total well-being. I think that that's going to be pivotal, not just, that's for all businesses. And we're going to have to be ever mindful of how that's going to play out in terms of how we build internal culture. And how we think about preparing people to manage their emotionalities and you know, just kind of giving some much needed, you know, validation that that's a part of being human. And I think that that's a shift to just in terms of work culture in general, moving away from some embedded toxicity that doesn't serve any of us. And I think that that's the kind of thing that's going to need to happen to just deal with the trauma of not just the last 400 years of history, but the last 2, right? As we think about moving forward, the last year of trauma playing out very much so through this very day. And so I think that that's going to be a major piece of it. And I think the other piece of it is that we're going to have to be ever more committed to actually pulling back on how we approach globalization. You know, like we have a growing number of people who are not going to want to go to college, are not going to be interested, prepared, or able to afford going to college. And the only way we're going to be able to create meaningful living wage jobs that allow for people of color in particular, but all of us essentially to be able to be self-sufficient is to really change how we approach manufacturing and bringing in and how we approach job creation, talent development and retention. Those are all going to have to be a new set of lenses for thinking about how do we make our workplaces ever more radically inclusive in terms of diversity and ever more safe. And those are mindset shifts in terms of how we approach leadership in the world of business and really in the world of running anything that seeks to employ people.
Thank you for that. And for those of you who are participating, we started a few minutes late. So if you don't mind being patient and staying on this webinar for 3 to 4 more minutes, we're going to finish up with any additional points that our panelists want to make. But I also want to turn to some of the questions that people have for us. So if you're able to stay on for another 3 to 4 minutes, we did start a few minutes late. And be gracious for that. We'd like to answer some of the questions, and then I'd love to give the panelists one last word to say in closing for this panel. So one of the questions that we have is, this is for, can individuals invest in the Community First Fund? The social impact investing information on the website suggests a limitation to only institutional investors. Kersy?
Yes, I can. Yes, they can. I can put that person in contact with our development, with our VP of development, and she'll get more information. But that would be great. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. I think we have that, and we will connect you with that person. Another question that we have is, what are some of the policy advocacy initiatives that we should be embracing regarding access to capital for women-owned businesses in general and Black and brown women-owned businesses? I want to answer that quickly, and then I want to point that out to Essma, actually punt that to Essma after I answer, because it's related to something that Essma noted regarding fair lending laws. I would like to say that one of the policy issues to be involved with is the Community Reinvestment Act, which is undergoing a review right now of how much we reinvest in banks, essentially. And to break it down in more simplistic terms for those of you who don't know what the Community Reinvestment Act is, it's one of the tools that was intended as part of a civil rights package to really regulate how well banks are lending in underserved areas, and particularly racial and ethnic communities as well. And there's just essentially a set of standards and look back retroactively on how well banks are doing under the Community Reinvestment Acts. And there's a whole grade and reporting measures and stuff. But the Federal Reserve has come out with some draft language for updating it, which that language is due February 16th for comments, for comments on that. But that is one of the advocacy issues that it's behind the scenes because it's a regulatory one, but it does have to do with civil rights and making sure that not just consumers for banking, but small businesses have a fair and even shot at getting the products that they need, and that seeks to eliminate systemic biases. And with that, I know, Tanya, you unmuted yourself. So I'm going to actually punt to you, and then I'm going to go to Essma because Essma, you brought that up as well, fair banking laws.
No, you can go ahead to Essma. I was
okay.
just being ready.
Oh, okay, sure.
Essma.
Yeah, sure. Two quick things I'll bring up. One thing is NASDAQ recently announced that in order for a company to be listed on their exchange, they must have some sort of diverse representation on their board, whether it's from, I believe, a racial, gender, or sexual orientation standpoint. They've been getting lots of pushback on that. And so I think it's extremely important for investors, endowments, organizations, asset owners to reach out to NASDAQ and try to really encourage them to move forward in that direction, because obviously NASDAQ is a very reputable stock exchange and also an extremely important player in the industry. And more than anything, I think this move can be very indicative and can set a great standard for additional organizations within the investment management industry to follow in their footsteps. And so that's just an incredible open opportunity. In addition, the state of Illinois and I believe the state of Connecticut are working together with a number of different investors and investment firms to encourage every single company in the Russell 3000 index to publicly disclose their gender and racial workforce diversity data. And the reason that's really important is because when we have access to that data, we can then engage with those companies on improving that data. Because right now it is not legally required for companies to publicly disclose their workforce diversity data. And so if you have a significant amount of assets and you want to participate in that coalition, definitely encourage you to reach out to them. The last thing I'll say is California recently passed a law on requiring a minimum quota of board diversity for every company within California. Keeping an eye out, I think, for anything similar across the country. There have been conversations with some members of Congress in the past about a potential Rooney Rule to mandate that every, I believe, publicly traded pension fund include at least one diverse manager within their investment searches. That hasn't, passed or been progressed in any significant manner, but keeping an eye out for things like that. And again, if you are an asset owner or part of an investment firm or in any way would have the capability to help propel these efforts forward, then really just reaching out to whomever. And I'll drop my email in the chat for anyone who wants to connect with me to kind of stay in the loop on these things and just kind of jumping in. I mean, there's lots of activity and really great activity in the industry. And I think at this point, it's just a matter of different players building on one another's efforts and ensuring we're propelling each other's efforts forward.
Great.
I'm sorry, Geri. I do also want to add, we were on a call in November, I believe it was, with the SEC. And one of the things that we talked about was the small business part of the SEC is really totally out of touch with Black and Brown people and how to best serve them. So one of the initiatives that we have been really encouraging them that is on the table is increasing the restrictions on creating, a VC or an investment fund or community fund to being knowledge-based and not just income-based, right? Because there are people that have been, invested in this community and for years, for decades, that have may not have all the resources, but can create a fund and bring together people with resources that can therefore invest in small business and businesses of color in particular. So the SEC is another policy way to get involved in looking up that initiative. I would have to circle back. If you email me, I can circle back and email you the two individuals at the SEC that are looking at lifting that restriction so that it's just not income based that makes you a certified investor, but you can you can also be a knowledge based certified investor.
Great, thank you so much. And also in closing, I'd like to add, for Small Business Majority, we are a policy advocacy nonprofit. So if you visit smallbusinessmajority.org, you'll see our host of policies that we advocate that are good for small business. Paid family medical leave was mentioned on this call earlier, among others. So there's a host of issues that you can be involved with through Small Business Majority as well, if you're interested in those topics. We're at time now, and I apologize for this, but I think this has been a wonderful discussion, and thank you to Diane and Women's Way for pulling this together, and acknowledging what's happened today is really uplifting the fact that we really do need to intentionally focus on gender equity and what's contributing to some of the trauma, as Kimberly referred to, in the last 400 years, and most especially in the last 2 years. So thank you, Diane.
Yes, and I just want to say thank you all. You are amazing speakers and experts on this critical topic. And I hope all those who stayed and listened and learned, take what you learned and put it into action, whether you're a consumer, investor, funder, put it into action. I want to see more women investing and supporting other women. And we do have a series coming up. Next one's going to be actually on Black women and healthcare in February. You can go see our next, the list of our next topics on womensway.org. But thank you again. And let's keep this movement going. As Kimberly said, this is a marathon. And we got to keep working together and supporting each other and learning and taking what we learned to action. So thank you for staying on longer. Please be safe, stay hopeful. And please reach out to any of us. We will be sending you a list of resources to all those who attended. So we have some other great resources that Kersy sent to us. So we will be sharing that with all of you. So thank you again. Be safe. And remember, be hopeful. And hopefully we'll see you at the next one. So thank you all. Good night.